What is crypto's Biden strategy? Most of the strategy that I've been discussing has talked about actually trying to get around Biden or oust Biden, specifically some of the people under him, like an Elizabeth Warren or Secretary Gary Gensler, all because the Biden administration has probably been the most aggressive anti-crypto administration that Bitcoin has ever seen. Now, of course, Obama, Bitcoin didn't really matter. We saw most of the Bitcoin hype traction kind of start under Trump. So I think now, to be fair, is the first time that Bitcoin has become so mainstream that a president has had to face it. And that is proof in the fact that we've had people like Trump, his competitor, releasing NFTs. We've had Vivek Ramaswamy, Ron DeSantis talking about being pro-crypto as Republicans on the campaign trail. So Biden, from his perspective, if we're looking at like the Democratic strategy, has been the first president to really have any kind of big touch, in my opinion, on the crypto Web3 world. So most of my goal has been, okay, if Biden is going to be kind of the bad guy for the crypto industry, how do we get him out, or how do we minimize people like Elizabeth Warren who are kind of controlling Biden? But I had a Democrat friend kind of talk to me and say, well, what are you going to do if he wins again? Right. And that's a very good point. Further, it's also not a good idea to only hone in on one strategy. Just because Biden is what I would consider anti-crypto doesn't mean that we shouldn't have in the back of our mind some kind of campaign to confront him in some way, shape, or form that could actually bring the Biden administration over to our side in some way, shape, or form. Now, that doesn't need to be some kind of aggressive strategy where he comes out and he says that he loves Bitcoin, but it simply means that maybe he just won't touch it. So how do we go about doing that? Well, one of the biggest things about the Biden administration is that obviously no one, not even Democrats, to my knowledge from the ones that I've talked to, are really big fans of Biden at all. And I think we all kind of recognize that he's old, he's not as cognizant as we would like him to be, meaning that most of what happens is due to his handlers. And we don't exactly always know who his handlers are, but we can kind of look at the people who are influencing him and other powerful Democrats. So from the crypto perspective, if I had to kind of strategically place money, marketing, different financial cash to certain candidates, what would I do? How would I influence the Biden regime, or at least maybe tamper down some of the anti-crypto Web3 rhetoric that has come from it? Well, we would look at leadership. We'd first probably go after, I would say, Senator Chuck Schumer, who is currently the head of the Senate. He's the majority leader. Chuck Schumer is incredibly powerful. And if you look at some of Chuck Schumer's donors, a lot of them are industry groups like Blackstone, BlackRock, of course, APAC. He's a big supporter of Israel. So if crypto starts donating to Chuck Schumer's campaigns, starts trying to educate his team, maybe request more formal meetings, that, of course, is one strategy, assuming he's receptive. But as you notice, I named some of his donors. Another strategy is to actually try to educate some of the donors about how this technology can be useful to them and why it should be preserved. There's nothing better than not only educating someone like a Chuck Schumer, but if you can educate his biggest handlers, because in politics, there's always someone handling somebody at some way, shape, or form, then you can gain an advantage. And so for Chuck Schumer, if you go to Open Secrets and you see some of his big donors, you would kind of go down that list and maybe figure out who are some of the people on that list that I can align with, especially now that there's a Bitcoin ETF, to kind of talk about, okay, how can we ensure that someone like Chuck Schumer is on our side? Another person would be Jim Clyburn. Now, I've mentioned Jim Clyburn in the past. We all know, if you've been watching my channel, that Jim Clyburn is one of the main reasons Biden is even president. Joe Clyburn endorsed Joe Biden. He's the reason Biden won South Carolina. He's the reason Biden won the majority of the black vote in the primaries in 2020. And because of Jim Clyburn, Biden was able to clinch the nomination. So without Jim Clyburn, and by the way, Jim Clyburn has already endorsed Biden for 2024. So because of Jim Clyburn, Biden is our president. So that means he's an incredibly powerful person. And we see that relationship go back and forth because Jim Clyburn's district in South Carolina has received quite a big deal of federal funding. That's how our political system works. So if we can make someone like a Jim Clyburn pro crypto, pro Web3, then that's a good strategy. Jim Clyburn is obviously very influential with the Biden administration. He is obviously owed a lot of favors, and he doesn't necessarily have a lot of power as it is in his position in the House. And so his real own avenue to power is really just the presidency. So if I was looking to influence Joe Biden and I know I couldn't get to him, I would go through someone like Jim Clyburn. It's also a cheaper option. Now, if you look at some of Jim Clyburn's donors, they're actually very similar to Chuck Schumer, which gives credence to my idea. Sometimes it's just better to, instead of educating the politician, which you always should, you can actually just go after the politician's largest donors. Some of Jim Clyburn's biggest donors, especially in 2022, were once again APAC, and some of these Blackstone industry groups and some big lobbying firms. It would be very interesting as a specific strategy to get people to align with APAC in their mission for pro-Israel candidates and see if you could also make them pro-crypto candidates. Now, obviously, that's a very touchy subject. I'm talking very strictly, strategically when it comes to crypto. And that doesn't just have to be APAC. It can be any large lobbying group. Just so happens that the people that I'm discussing, who I think are very influential in the Biden regime, are these people, Jim Clyburn and Chuck Schumer, who APAC has donated to. So other people that I would look at are people who I know are going to be electable or elected as Democrats in 2024 and start getting in their good graces now. Now, we've already kind of touched on this previously, but one of the obvious candidates is someone like Adam Schiff. Adam Schiff, very anti-Trump, very pro-Biden. Now that he's won the primary in their jungle version of the primary in California, there's no doubt in my mind that he will be California's senator. He's relatively young. He could be their senator for another 30 years. Getting in early now, which Fair Shake and some other pro-crypto political organizations have done, will be key in case we still have Biden's administration for the next 4 years. Because at the end of the day, Biden can do whatever he wants, but he still, or his handlers are still just doing a balancing act among different factions within their party, within the Senate and the House. Now, of course, Adam Schiff may actually not be as good as a bet as Jim Clyburn, because a lot of the talk that I hear, especially in DC, is that Democrats are going to flip the House and Republicans are going to flip the Senate, which is going to be very interesting as far as makeup goes. And that would actually elevate someone like Jim Clyburn and devalue someone like Adam Schiff. But Adam Schiff is going to be here for a long term. These are long-term investments, so he's still a good bet. And if anything, Jim Clyburn could be an incredibly good bet, because anytime the Democrats gain power because of their seniority structure, and Jim Clyburn having been around so long and being so influential, would no doubt have a lot of sway in the House. The reason these strategies are so effective and so amazing is because all you need to do is find strategic individuals to spend money on. We don't have to educate everybody in Congress. We don't have to educate everybody in the House, everybody in the Senate. We just need to educate those who are influential to Biden. And we could go a step further and figure out who on his staff, who of his appointees are people that we should be talking to. Now, of course, Gary Gensler is his appointee. There's a lot of talk that once Gary Gensler's term is open in 2026, that if Biden's still president, he probably wouldn't grant him any other further positions. He's kind of brought a really bad brand to the Democratic Party when it comes to technology in general. And Biden seems to be continuing down that train now with his executive order on AI, but I'm going to talk about that in another video, not this video. But the key here is there's got to be people within the Biden administration who he's appointed that you can kind of target and talk to try to gain favoritism, because people within the Biden administration know that the Biden administration isn't going to be around forever. They need to be building relationships too. They need to be looking at whatever their future career might be if Biden doesn't win, or for the next Democratic president, whoever that might be, they want to find themselves in their good graces as well so that they can once again get an appointment. And so all these investment of cash and capital and marketing are all very strategic when you're thinking of the long-term game. So the riskiest approach would be to actually just double down and figure out if you can influence Elizabeth Warren, which is probably very unlikely and probably not going to be able to happen. But if I had to, and that was my strategy, what I would do is I'd go very aggressive locally in the state of Massachusetts. I would get the local Democratic parties very involved in the crypto scene. I would start donating to state level candidates in Massachusetts so that the state level candidates become crypto. I would look at some of the Ivy League schools in Massachusetts that Elizabeth Warren is, of course, very close with, and see if I can get them to gain a pro crypto, pro Web3 stance. And then I would tone down all the anti Elizabeth Warren marketing because it kind of creates a feedback loop where it gives crypto people something to talk about and it gives Elizabeth Warren something that she can champion. And we've kind of talked about our Elizabeth Warren strategy before. You could do some polling, but you would just simply change some of the polling. So the polling you would do, instead of trying to say, make it negative toward Elizabeth Warren, you could still do polling about how many jobs does crypto create in the state of Massachusetts, and start sharing that polling with no necessary political bias. You could start polling Massachusetts people, Massachusettsans, I don't know what they're called, on their feelings toward crypto. And if you know anything about polling, you can manipulate it a variety of ways. So we could just simply write the questions to the point where obviously it makes it look like most Massachusetts people, citizens, are pro crypto. And once some of those polls are seen by Elizabeth Warren's team, then they might start to change their tune. You can also always have a realistic threat in the background of her being primaried and start looking for possible candidates if that's the case. But Elizabeth Warren probably isn't going anywhere anytime soon unless some giant scandal erupts. So you have to just think differently when you're trying to change someone's opinion who has already considered you an enemy. And there is something to be said, of course, about, okay, if I don't like Biden, time to support Trump. If I don't like Elizabeth Warren, time to support a competitor. If I want to oust both of them and get rid of Gary Gensler, how do I support Republicans because of things being so partisan right now? But that's not always the reality of the situation. And if you want to think strategically, you have to be prepared for every scenario. So you should also be thinking, okay, what is my Democratic strategy if I'm a big player in Web3? What are the companies? What are the other lobbying groups? What are the other big super PACs that maybe I should be partnering with and influencing and attending some of their events to be that lone pro crypto voice to try to get them on my side? Imagine if there is a giant fundraiser for Jim Clyburn with BlackRock and Blackstone and APAC, and you donate to get into that same room and you are the pro crypto voice. And that could be same for someone like Elizabeth Warren, who still hosts fundraisers. She might give you a cold shoulder after a while, but if you're dedicated and do it enough, and if especially you're a local and you're gaining influence in the state of Massachusetts Democratic Party, over time, you might be able to have some wins. Now, of course, that's over time. We don't really exactly have a lot of time. That's why these elections are going to be so critical. Even Biden's executive order on AI, for example, has been very quick acting, and you can do a lot with just an executive order. But that's when you get the courts involved, and there's ways to fight that as well. So as long as you have your levers on kind of every source of power from the legislative, executive, and the judicial, you can kind of broaden your strategy and have an overall even approach. And that would definitely be a defensive measure against the Biden regime. If you really needed it, was then you start funding judges' campaigns, which is something we'll talk about in another video. But at the end of the day, you don't have to just say, oh, well, our only pro crypto option is to support Trump and to support the Republican Party. I might argue that might be the easiest option, and everybody has their own political biases. But if you're a Democrat and you're dedicated to the Democratic Party and you love the Democratic platform and you're also pro crypto, you need to be thinking outside the box and you need to be thinking about different options. And some of those options are what I just laid out: donating to specific individuals who are influential to Biden and his electability, and who without Biden would nowhere near be as powerful as he is today.